I think that the name of Leonardo da Vinci is known to absolutely everyone in this world because it is a real symbol of the Renaissance, the golden age of human thought, when the boundaries between art, science, and philosophy were practically erased. His name is a designation of how a real genius should look like. He was the embodiment of the ideal of the universal man, a talented person whose interests and talents covered almost all areas of human knowledge. When we say Leonardo, images of his immortal works immediately appear in our minds. The enigmatic smile of the Mona Lisa, which has captivated the eye for more than 5 centuries and raised countless questions about its true meaning. The dramatic composition of The Last Supper, full of deep psychological insight, which depicts the moment of betrayal with such force that it still evokes admiration. These artistic masterpieces do not simply decorate museums. They are objects of study, analysis, and admiration. Leonardo's greatness, however, extended far beyond his paintings. He was a pioneer in science and engineering, a man centuries ahead of his time. He did more than just draw. He analyzed, studied, and understood the mechanics of the human body at a level unattainable by most of his contemporaries. His engineering projects, from ambitious, visionary designs for flying machines that anticipated the invention of the airplane, to detailed plans for submarines, bridges, hydraulic systems, and complex machines for a variety of purposes, demonstrate his incredible foresight and ingenuity. He was not only a theorist, but also a practitioner, seeking to apply his knowledge to the creation of functional and useful devices. His curiosity was boundless, like an ever-burning fire. He studied everything from the movement of clouds and the flow of water to geology, astronomy, optics, botany, and even military affairs. He was a musician, a philosopher, a cartographer. Each new area of knowledge became another platform for research and creativity. This tireless desire to learn and constantly improve himself and the world around him was the driving force of his entire life. Behind his extraordinary intelligence and hard work, there are subtle but interesting character traits and daily habits, which we will look at today. These little-known habits of Leonardo are not just a collection of interesting facts for historians and art lovers. They represent much more. They are a profound understanding of how one man was able to achieve such incredible levels of mastery, productivity, and innovation in so many, sometimes completely different and even seemingly incompatible fields. These habits reveal his unique approach to learning, his innovative methods of creative thinking, his principles for organizing his own life, and, last but not least, his deep and open-minded attitude to the world around him. They offer us valuable lessons that remain surprisingly relevant and useful even in our era, more than 500 years later. By exploring these less obvious facets of his life, we can not only deepen our understanding of Leonardo da Vinci as a genius, but also find inspiration and practical techniques for developing our own abilities, expanding our horizons, and reaching new, unattainable heights. These habits were not random quirks or the result of simple luck. They were deeply thought-out, conscious, and disciplined strategies that shaped his thinking, his work process, and ultimately his entire colossal legacy. They demonstrate his phenomenal discipline, method, and commitment to excellence in everything he ever did. Today, we'll dive deep into Leonardo's world to explore 5 little-known habits that played a critical role in shaping his unique way of thinking and allowing him to leave such a mark on human history. We'll explore how each of these habits helped him be so creative, productive, and able to see connections between different fields, where others saw only isolated facts. We'll also draw practical lessons from them that can be applied to our modern lives as we strive for growth and self-improvement. Therefore, I propose to finally move on to the first fact, in which we will consider Leonardo's sleep in more detail. And all because it was one of the most intriguing and, most radical habits of Leonardo da Vinci was his unique sleep regime. While the vast majority of people, both in the Renaissance and in our time, follow monophasic sleep, it is one long period of sleep, usually at night or, less commonly, biphasic sleep. These are 2 periods of sleep, for example, a daytime sleep after a nighttime sleep. Leonardo, according to numerous testimonies and analysis of his incredible productivity, practiced a special form of so-called polyphasic sleep. This regimen was radically different from the generally accepted norms and assumed the distribution of short but regular periods of sleep throughout the entire hourly cycle of day and night. instead of one long night's rest. Most often, this specific variant, Leonardo, is called the Übermann regimen or Dimaxion, a concept that later became known, but according to researchers, was used by the genius long before its formal description. Just imagine, while the rest of the world was falling into a deep 8-hour nightly sleep, Leonardo da Vinci was devoting those hours to his countless projects. This could be creating a fresco, which required attention to detail, studying anatomy through dissections, which was very difficult and demanding, designing new machines, from flying machines to fortifications and hydraulic structures, or keeping his notebooks, where he collected his thoughts, observations, drawings, and reflections. This habit was not a mere habit or the result of a genius's eccentricity. It was a deeply conscious part of his quest for maximum efficiency and productivity. In an era when electricity was unavailable and the main working day was limited by the natural light cycle, Leonardo's ability to work virtually around the clock gave him an advantage. He could use the early morning hours when the world was still asleep and there was absolute silence, or the deep hours of the night when he was undisturbed by everyday activities, visitors, and the noise of the city, to immerse himself deeply and intently in his work. This allowed him not only to tackle several large-scale projects simultaneously, but also to bring them to perfection, paying attention to small details and nuances that others might miss due to fatigue, lack of time, or the inability to work in peace and quiet. Historians and biographers who have studied Leonardo's life and work have often relied on his extensive manuscripts and notebooks, numbering tens of thousands of pages, as the main evidence of his incredible productivity. These countless pages, densely filled with very small handwriting, careful notes, complex drawings, precise calculations, scientific observations, and profound thoughts about life, are direct evidence that he did not sleep much longer than his contemporaries. He was constantly learning, observing, experimenting, and documenting his every step and every thought, without missing a single detail, which would have been absolutely impossible with a standard monophasic sleep pattern. Moreover, some modern research in the field of neuroscience and sleep psychology offers intriguing explanations for the potential benefits of such interrupted sleep. It is believed that regular but short naps may have helped improve mental abilities. Each nap may have been a kind of reset for the brain, improving memory, concentration, problem-solving, and crucially for Leonardo, creativity. Some experts believe that rapid eye movement, REM sleep phases, which help with memory and creative thinking, may have occurred during such short naps. Therefore, such short breaks did not just provide a respite, but also actively helped his mental work. Important to tell you that this sleep pattern, which has received the unofficial name Da Vinci sleep, although it sounds incredibly attractive from the point of view of increasing productivity, it is very difficult to maintain and is generally unsuitable for most modern people. Its successful adaptation and long-term use requires not only self-discipline, but also an almost complete absence of external distractions, as well as a unique physiological predisposition to such a rhythm. But for Leonardo da Vinci, this was not just an experiment or a passing fancy, but a natural and effective way to maximize his innate potential in the limited time and resources of the Renaissance. This habit, like many other aspects of his life, shows that he understood his body and mind well, and was willing to go against common rules and traditions for the sake of his great goals and endless desire to learn new things. He was not just a genius, he created his own life as an engineer. And we move on to the next habit, which will tell us about the unique technique of mirror writing. In addition to his unusual approach to sleep, Leonardo da Vinci had another, no less mysterious, and at first glance strange habit: to write in reverse, in mirror writing. Almost all of his numerous notebooks, drafts, scientific notes, personal notes, as well as most of his letters and even some instructions for students were written in a special way, from right to left. To read them, you needed a mirror. This strange but very consistent writing style has become one of the most famous and mysterious features of his manuscripts. Over the centuries, it has caused many guesses, legends, and myths. Everyone tried to understand why he wrote like that. Also, one of the most popular hypotheses was that Leonardo used mirror writing to hide his revolutionary ideas from prying eyes. In an era when scientific discoveries could be perceived as madness, the Inquisition had enormous power and could serve as protection from persecution. In addition, there was a risk of industrial espionage and plagiarism. At a time when the concepts of copyright were just emerging, thieves could easily appropriate other people's inventions or artistic techniques. The encrypted text created an additional barrier. Some believed that Leonardo wrote from right to left simply because he was left-handed. It was more convenient for him not to stain the ink he had just written with his hand. Writing in this direction is more natural for a left-hander than moving his hand through already written words from left to right. There is also an opinion that this was simply a feature of his character. The genius wanted to stand out and surprise others. But let's dive into more modern analysis. Researchers studying his work, cognitive processes, and psychology increasingly believed that mirror writing was not simply a defense or a result of his left-handedness. Rather, it was an effective thinking tool. This way of writing likely helped him process information more deeply and developed his creative abilities. But it is worth saying that the version about Leonardo's left-handedness is the most simple and practical. Since he was left-handed, writing from left to right, as was customary, led to his hand constantly smudging fresh ink. Writing from right to left, on the contrary, allowed the hand to move over a clean surface without dirtying what had already been written. This significantly increased the speed and clarity of his notes, which was absolutely essential for a person who constantly wrote down his thoughts, observations, and the smallest ideas. Given the phenomenal volume of his notebooks, thousands of pages, densely filled with incredibly small inert but legible handwriting, such practical benefits become very clear. When thoughts come quickly, during sudden inspiration, stopping and waiting for the ink to dry would be a big obstacle. But this habit could also be deeply connected to his method of thinking and the unique structure of his brain. Leonardo did not simply mechanically write down the necessary information. He constantly analyzed, rethought, compared, and created knowledge from different fields. Some psychologists, neuroscientists, and cognitive scientists believe that mirror writing could activate different parts of the brain. It may have stimulated lateral thinking and helped develop his outstanding spatial imagination. If he was simultaneously sketching, drawing complex engineering diagrams, creating anatomical drawings, and describing his ideas in words, then the transition from direct image to mirror writing may have been an integral part of a complex thought process, where visual and verbal thinking were constantly closely linked and complemented each other. This practice may have helped the brain work more deeply and diversifiedly, forcing it to work in an unusual but effective mode and creating new, strong connections. He was not simply writing words down, but building or deconstructing them, which in turn improved his memorization, understanding, and analysis of what he had written. And finally, mirror writing could have acted as a kind of filter for his consciousness and helped him concentrate better. When information is written in such an unusual way, you need to make more effort to read it, stop, and concentrate harder. It could have been a kind of mental check that forced Leonardo to think over and revise his notes every time. So he did not just write down quick thoughts, but constantly improved them, found new connections, and noticed possible mistakes or shortcomings. It also ensured constant learning and self-correction, which were an important part of all his creativity and scientific work. For a genius who actively strove for a complete and deep understanding of the world and perfection in everything, such a slow and deliberate way of working with thoughts was very valuable. It allowed him to constantly improve his ideas, but although it was not the main reason, one cannot exclude the element of so-called secret or uniqueness. At a time when information was very valuable and ideas could easily be stolen or used against the author, mirror writing created an additional, albeit easily bypassable, barrier. It was a kind of special device that, on the one hand, was decipherable by anyone with an ordinary mirror, but, on the other hand, was inconvenient enough to eliminate random, curious, or malevolent competitors. Leonardo liked this little intellectual game around his personal notes, which added another layer to his multifaceted and enigmatic personality. Thus, Leonardo da Vinci's mirror writing was much more than just a wish. It may even have been a natural consequence of his left-handedness. This habit had several functions. It was practical, it helped his unique thinking, it developed his perception, it improved his concentration, and it even provided some privacy. It is another clear indication of his boundless inventiveness, even in the most mundane aspects of his life, and his amazing ability to turn potential limitations into powerful advantages, using them to enhance his genius. And we go further and look at the next habit that was in keeping diaries and notebooks. It was little known, but perhaps one of the most significant and Leonardo da Vinci's inseparable habits are his continuous, meticulous, and incredibly systematic keeping of diaries and notebooks. These manuscripts, which have come down to us in the form of tens of thousands of pages, are not just collections of random notes. They were Leonardo's real, external brain. His personal, constantly expanding library, a portable scientific laboratory, an art studio, and a philosophical notebook in one large archive. These notes helped him in everything, from the first sketches of future paintings to detailed scientific works, from complex engineering calculations and even deep philosophical thoughts, from simple shopping lists and expenses to unique anatomical drawings. This habit was so ingrained in his daily life and so universal that virtually everything we know about his thoughts, his working methods, his discoveries, and his unique worldview comes from these priceless manuscripts. They were a direct gateway into his extraordinary mind. But unlike many of his contemporaries, who might jot down notes, business correspondence, or recipes, Leonardo turned the process of note-taking into a coherent, ever-evolving system. He almost always carried small pocketbooks or separate, specially prepared sheets of paper with him, which were his companions. He was ready at any moment, wherever he was, on a walk around the city, watching birds, or in the studio, working on a painting, to record a fleeting thought, a sudden insight, an observed natural phenomenon, details of a new experiment, or simply an interesting fact. All this ended up in his notes. They were surprisingly varied in content and showed the breadth of his interests as well as the depth of his curiosity. We also know that he made detailed descriptions of everything he saw, from the behavior of water in rivers and streams, for example, how whirlpools form, how waves break on the shore, how light reflects on water, the flight characteristics of birds, the structure of their wings and tails, the growth of plants, the arrangement of leaves on a stem, and the anatomy of different animals. He did not simply look at the world, he saw it, analyzed every detail, and looked for hidden patterns. These observations were often accompanied by careful sketches. I will also tell you that all of his notebooks were filled with drawings and detailed descriptions of mechanical devices, from complex cranes to military vehicles. He conducted research in the fields of optics, hydrodynamics, geology. For example, he loved to carefully study the formation of mountains and fossils, astronomy and physics. He wrote down both successful and unsuccessful experiments, constantly refining his ideas and making notes on what needed to be checked or changed. It was a real scientific journal to which he returned more than once. It is worth remembering that he was a fine artist, and therefore among his notes are hundreds of incredibly precise and detailed drawings of the human body, every muscle, bone, nerve, organ, made on the basis of his own dissections. These notes were revolutionary for their time, significantly ahead of the medical knowledge of the era and demonstrating his desire to understand the fundamental principles of the functioning of living organisms. He also made preliminary sketches for his future paintings and sculptures, documenting ideas for compositions, notes on color mixing, rules of perspective. He might record how a certain ray of light falls on a person's face at different times of day, so that he could use this knowledge in a portrait, or how folds of fabric fall on a moving figure. His diaries were also a place for deep reflection on life, death, knowledge, ethics, morality, and religion. He used them to ponder complex and important issues, expressing his own, often unconventional views on various things. There were also notes from a list of groceries for the house or ordered materials for the workshop to a list of books he wanted to read or tools he needed for work. These entries show him as a person who was very organized and responsible, even in everyday matters. We have seen that these notebooks were not simply passive archives of information, but dynamic, constantly evolving systems for actively processing information. Leonardo constantly returned to his old notes, reread them, supplemented them with new observations, rethought them with a new approach, and made references to other parts of his notes. He connected different areas of knowledge that seemed completely unrelated. This helped him notice deep connections and similarities that others simply did not see. For example, detailed observations of the flow of water could suddenly inspire him to a revolutionary idea about the movement of blood in the human circulatory system. and a careful study of the structure of birds' wings and the mechanics of their flight could inspire a new design for an aircraft. It was this knowledge from many different disciplines, the constant interaction between art, science, engineering, and philosophy, that distinguished his unique thinking and enabled him to make discoveries that were far ahead of their time. His notebooks were like a so-called second memory, a reliable storage that freed the mind for new ideas, hypotheses, and creativity, since all old thoughts and discoveries were saved and always at hand. Even the very act of transferring a complex thought to paper often helps to clarify it, develop it, identify its weaknesses, or, conversely, strengthen its argumentation. It was a process of mental elaboration. In a sense, keeping a diary was a form of self-education and self-improvement for Leonardo that never stopped. He was his own strictest teacher and most responsible student, constantly asking himself questions and seeking answers, testing his hypotheses and correcting his mistakes. This habit allowed him to become a true man who possessed not just extensive, but also deep, interconnected knowledge in a variety of fields, because he literally never stopped learning, observing, reflecting, and recording everything he learned and discovered. His notebooks became not only a reflection of his genius, but also one of the main tools, thanks to which this genius was able to reveal itself in the whole field and leave behind such a huge and priceless heritage for all mankind. They are direct proof that systematic recording of thoughts and observations, even the most, at first glance, insignificant and fleeting, can become a strong stimulus for creativity, new ideas, deep understanding of the world, and great intellectual growth. We have already looked at the keeping of diaries, and you are probably wondering what the next fact will be. And I can tell you, because it consists in Leonardo's constant observation. He was, in fact, above all, a tireless and unique observer of everything in the world. His fourth, and perhaps one of the most fundamental habits, which underlay his entire mind, was the constant, extremely detailed, and absolutely impartial observation of the surrounding world and the immediate recording of everything seen and meaningful. For him, seeing did not mean simply looking at the surface of objects or phenomena. It was like deeply analyzing, mentally or graphically, and breaking phenomena down into their smallest parts, looking for their causes, hidden mechanisms, and connections between them. He did not blindly believe in principles, established opinions, or other people's views, even if they belonged to great authorities. Everything had to be questioned, tested, and studied personally through experience and observation. This habit became the basis of his scientific discoveries and realism in art. He could spend hours sitting by a river or stream, studying small details of water, for example, how complex whirlpools are formed, how waves collide with obstacles and create unique patterns, how light changes and reflects from the constantly changing water surface, giving birth to highlights and shadows. These long and careful observations became the basis of his large and very fascinating studies, which were significantly ahead of their time. They also showed up in his paintings, where he conveyed the movement of water with amazing accuracy and verisimilitude. Whether in landscapes or in the background of portraits, he also studied the flight of birds in detail, carefully sketching every feather, every movement of the wing, every bend of the body in the air. Thanks to this, he tried to understand all the principles of aerodynamics, which eventually led to his numerous designs of flying machines, many of which were even much more efficient than the ideas of airplanes and helicopters. He observed the anatomy of animals to better understand their movements, musculature, and skeletal structure, and then used this knowledge to create more realistic figures in his artwork. However, his observations were certainly not limited to nature. Leonardo was also a profound and insightful student of the human body and structure. He constantly studied facial expressions, trying to capture the subtlest, fleeting shades of emotion. It could be joy, sadness, surprise, anger, melancholy, and how they manifest themselves in facial expressions, gaze, position of the lips. He also observed the anatomy of the human body, not only to draw it with precision, but also for a deep understanding of its functioning, its mechanics, its illnesses, and health. For this purpose, he spent quite a lot of time dissection of human corpses, which in turn was an extremely bold, risky, and revolutionary decision for that time, when such actions were prohibited or even considered blasphemy. He tried to record every nerve, every muscle, every bone, every organ as accurately as possible, trying to understand how all these elements work together in the complex system of a living organism. His anatomical drawings still amaze with their scientific accuracy and unrivaled artistic mastery. The key aspect of Leonardo's habit was the rapid and systematic recording of everything he saw. As soon as he noticed something interesting, something that piqued his curiosity or gave him a new idea, it could be an unusual plant, a complex joint movement, a unique cloud shape on the horizon, or the expression on a passerby's face, he would immediately take out his notebook, which he, of course, always carried with him, and make a quick sketch or detailed note of everything he saw. These notes were not just a simple recording of facts, but also an active process of awareness and analysis. Sketching helped him not only to remember, but also to distribute a complex object into simple geometric shapes to understand its structure and principles of operation. Notes accompanied the drawings, explaining the principle of operation, putting forward hypotheses, asking new questions or suggesting ideas for further research. It was not just about observing the necessary emotions and movements, but a dynamic and interactive process of cognition, where the hand, eye, and brain worked simultaneously. Quite obvious that this habit required great discipline, incredible curiosity, and endless patience. Leonardo never thought that he knew enough and never allowed himself to stop learning. Every day, even every minute, he was open to new knowledge because he was ready to see it. He learned from everything and everyone, from an experienced farmer, from a professional craftsman, from nature, which was his main teacher, and even from his own mistakes, which he carefully analyzed and drew conclusions from. This constant, almost insatiable desire for a deep understanding of the world and for the absolute clarification of the smallest details made him not only a great artist, capable of depicting the world with incredible realism and vividness, but also an outstanding scientist who was centuries ahead of his time in a wide variety of fields of knowledge. From biology to engineering, Leonardo's habit of detailed observation and immediate recording was thus not just a method of working or a professional skill, but a truly meaningful way of living and thinking. It allowed him to continually expand his knowledge, improve his skills, generate new ideas, and create masterpieces that still amaze us with their scientific precision, artistic depth, and, of course, their unimaginable beauty. He helped teach us that true, profound understanding of the world came not from sight or faith, but from careful, critical, and systematic study of everything around us, and a constant striving to improve ourselves. We have sorted this out, so let's smoothly move on to the last habit that Leonardo was extremely careful with himself. This was one of Leonardo da Vinci's deepest and most intellectually daring habits. He fundamentally, unwaveringly doubted the generally accepted rules and never stopped checking everything he learned, read, or considered an established fact. During the Renaissance, when the authority of ancient texts, especially ancient philosophers and Roman doctors, such as Galen and church habits and rules, were practically unchanged and were, Leonardo, all his courage, and of course for obvious factors, relied only on his own experience, direct observation and experiment. For him there was no last word or absolute indisputable truth that was established by someone else. Each new discovery was only a new step to the next question, and each theory, even the most deeply rooted, required the strictest proof and personal confirmation. This approach was truly revolutionary for its time and stood in stark contrast to the outdated but familiar traditions. At a time when most scientists, doctors, and artists simply followed traditions, mechanically rewrote ancient laws and trusted familiar ideas without critical analysis, Leonardo questioned everything. He did not accept information on faith just because it was written in a smart book or said by a famous professor. He wanted to see, touch, measure, and understand it himself. One striking example is his work in anatomy. Instead of simply reading the works of Galen or Aristotle, as many doctors of the time did, Leonardo personally performed dissections of human bodies, which was an incredibly bold and even dangerous undertaking, because at that time the church authorities did not approve of such practices. The purpose of these dissections was not simply to satisfy personal curiosity, but to systematically verify and confirm or refute existing anatomical knowledge. As a result, he discovered many inaccuracies and even gross errors in classical texts, because he trusted his eyes, hands, and his brain much more than the centuries-old teachings that everyone was talking about. His anatomical drawings, made with incredible precision, detail, and perspective, became the most important and significant contribution to medicine and biology, significantly ahead of their time by many centuries and laying the foundation for the further development of these sciences. The same was true of his scientific research in other areas. When he studied, for example, the movement of the same water, these could be the simplest river flows, eddies of systems. He did not simply accept existing theoretical models on faith. He constantly experimented, built various models, observed the dynamics of liquids under various conditions, trying to understand the whole essence and principles of hydrodynamics. He tested his hypotheses over and over again, constantly refining his conclusions based on new data and experiments. His quest to understand how birds fly led him not only to hundreds of sketches of their anatomy and flight, but also to the creation of complex drawings of flying machines, which we have already mentioned more than once. He could not accept the simple idea of flapping flight without an understanding of the mechanics of air movement, wing shape, and weight distribution, constantly asking questions and seeking all sorts of physical explanations. This habit of critical analysis and detailed re-examination was not a sign of indecision or lack of conviction. On the contrary, it must be said that it was a manifestation of rigorous, modern scientific thinking that was clearly ahead of his colleagues. Leonardo understood perfectly well that truth is rarely simple, obvious, or easily accessible, and that to reach it, it is necessary to go through a long path of careful research, bypassing wrong paths, testing every hypothesis, and constantly adjusting his understanding in the light of new data. He was a kind of knowledge detective who would not rest until he found irrefutable evidence that was based on reality and verifiable experience, and not just on unverified but loud assertions. He had his own famous aphorism in which he asserted that experience was the amplifier of everything, and he perfectly reflects this philosophy of life. For the artist, this habit of doubt and search for truth meant a constant striving for absolute realism and verisimilitude in his works. He did not paint some ideal figures that were based only on his imagination or outdated canons of beauty. He painted people and nature as they really were because he had studied them thoroughly, taking them apart into their smallest components and understood their essence. This habit allowed him to notice and capture subtle details of facial expressions, gestures, the play of light and shadow, the texture of materials, making his works of art alive, deep, dynamic, and truly arousing admiration in the viewer. In today's world, which is now overflowing with information that is often unverified, contradictory, or even deliberately untrue, Leonardo's habit of critical thinking, healthy doubt, and constant verification becomes especially relevant and vital. He teaches us not to take anything on faith, but to always ask questions, demand evidence, question even authorities, and rely only on our own, carefully verified and reasoned understanding of the world. This habit was one of the main engines of his mind, enabling him not only to discover completely new things and make breakthrough discoveries, but also to destroy outdated ideas, false prejudices, and preconceptions, thus paving the way for future progress. He was a pioneer because he was not afraid to be a doubter. And today we looked at the 5 little-known but truly incredibly important habits of Leonardo da Vinci: polyphasic sleep, mirror writing, constant diary and notebook keeping, detailed observation of the world around him, and constant double-checking of information. All this together shows him not just as a genius, born with outstanding talents, but also as a person who consciously, methodically, and with great discipline built his unique approach to life, learning, and creativity. These habits were not random whims or spontaneous impulses. They were deeply thought out and interconnected strategies that allowed him to maximize his inner potential, effectively overcome the technological and social limitations of his time, and make breakthrough discoveries that left an indelible mark on a wide range of human life. His unusual polyphasic sleep pattern gave him vast amounts of time to work and think, effectively doubling his productive hours compared to most of his contemporaries, and perhaps even stimulating creative insights through regular short periods of rest. Mirror writing served not only the practical purposes associated with his left-handedness, but is also thought by all researchers to have stimulated unique thought processes that were invaluable to an artist and engineer. His countless notebooks were more than just a repository of information. They were a dynamic laboratory of ideas where he organized his thoughts, linked different areas of knowledge into a single interconnected system, and continually developed his concepts. His constant, even at times, meticulous observation of the smallest details of the world around him allowed him to see principles and patterns that others overlooked, and to understand the essence of phenomena hidden from general attention. And finally, his habit of healthy doubt and re-examination was that unshakable and incredibly important foundation that allowed him to go beyond outdated laws and find the truth, relying solely on his own experience, reason and logic, and not on other people's statements. I can say that today, more than 5 centuries later, these habits of Leonardo da Vinci remain amazingly relevant and can serve as a source of inspiration and practical lessons for each of us. In the modern world, where information absorbs our lives and time becomes an increasingly valuable resource, we can extract from his life some important tips and rules even for us. For example, these could be principles of time management. Of course, polyphasic sleep may be too radical for most. Leonardo's lesson about maximizing productive hours and efficiently distributing energy remains extremely important. Finding your own rhythms and optimal periods for deep work can greatly increase our effectiveness. Also reminds us that going beyond the usual methods and using unconventional approaches can greatly stimulate our creativity and help us find new solutions. We should not forget about regularly keeping personal notes, diaries, creating mind maps, or using digital knowledge bases, because they help not only to show thoughts, but also to structure them, develop ideas and relationships between different areas of information. Leonardo teaches us to slow down, to observe the world around us carefully, to ask questions about how everything works. Developing attention to detail and deep analytical observation helps to increase our understanding of how this world works in general and inspires new ideas and, of course, improves our skills in any field. In the era of unreliable news in which we live and information noise, Leonardo's habit of doubting unverified data and the desire for careful verification are the key to making our own proven and correct decisions, forming our own opinions and searching for objective truth in any area of life. Leonardo da Vinci was not just a great artist, an outstanding scientist, or a brilliant inventor. He was, in fact, a life guide who showed by his own example how art and science, boundless curiosity and strict discipline, keen observation and unprecedented ingenuity can be harmoniously combined. His habits are not just interesting historical facts, but first and foremost an inspiring guide and practical example for anyone who strives for deep knowledge of the world. The comprehensive development of their potential and the creation of something significant that can survive the centuries.